Dirty Side Supercomputer Initializing. Welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track podcast. Analyzing Singapore Grand Prix. Analysis complete. Supercomputer 6-word synopsis. Wet, boring, walls, crashes, slicks, action. Now let's hear from the bozos.
Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track. It's America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian, that's Rob. Today was the Singa-pour GP, and boy, it was okay.
It was wet.
Yeah, it was wet. It never dried.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just saying before we started recording, both of our plans kind of got thrown up in the air this morning. I had a soccer game football that was going to overlap with periods of the race, but I was going to be able to watch the first hour free. So I was like, I'm going to get up early. I'm going to get into my gear. I'm going to drive up to the field early so I can just sit in my car and watch the first hour of the race before I even get out. And that all things were beautiful. And then I turned on the TV to have my morning cup of coffee, and it was just monsoon season. I was like, this is not starting on time. This is going to ruin everything. And well, we'll get there when we get to the review. It didn't quite ruin everything, but
No, it didn't.
I did have flashbacks to Spa. I was like, is this even going to happen? Because it was just coming down like biblical amounts of rain.
I was actually worried about Spa, and then I quickly said this could be Monaco 2.0, and we'll talk more about that as we go, because I think it actually was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll get there when we get there. We will do our normal news and social race review, and because it's a back-to-back, we will then do a Japan preview, and that will pretty much be the lay of the land today. So, I got suckered in real badly on social media this week, Brian. I bought all the hype train that Alfa Romeo were doing when there was all this like countdown of teaser tweets coming out going, something big to announce at the end of the week, and they really went big on it, and they were doing all this imagery with tigers in it, and at the same time Audi were doing some tweets about Chinese Year of the Tiger, and it was like everything was all coming together. This is how Audi are coming back in, not with Red Bull, and everyone's going, yeah, it won't just be because Zhou is re-signing and he's, it will time with him. It can't possibly be that because they've gone big. And it was that. And as much as I'm really, really happy for him, and I'm super happy he's going to be there next year, I was kind of left, oh.
I mean, I saw the news. I don't know if I'd bought the hype like you had of something big really coming, but I saw the news. I was excited. I feel like he's had a good rookie year, and I can't wait to see what he does in another year in the car. But the thing that we've been following since August 2nd, the Marcus Ericsson, Nostradamus, the Oracle, the way he's predicted silly season, the rumors are heating up now that we should be anticipating Pierre to Alpine. And that would work in Marcus Ericsson's idea of what Alpine will be next year, Ocon and Gasly. So he just keeps checking the boxes. Like it's ridiculous. The problem now becomes, though, the second part of that rumor is De Vries to AlphaTauri. And so Marcus had said Schumacher to AlphaTauri at a point when I thought Schumacher would stay with Haas. So first of all, he was right to have this movement kind of pinned, but we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, what do you think? Like, how did he have this so right?
I don't know. I mean, he's obviously a lot closer to it. I don't know how much people chat behind the scenes and how much a silly season is kind of taking shape in drivers' minds before any of us even find out about it. Or he took a big flyer, a big guess, and we'll come to it later. I mean, I went for a flyer for a tweet about the race last night, which really hasn't aged well. And he took a flyer that his might not have aged well. And if it didn't age well, people would just go, oh, well, never mind. But it has aged well. And we're all watching it now to see how close he gets. But, talking of announcements, McLaren, as they always do, despite the fact that their on-track performance isn't as amazing, we'll come to that today, but so far it hasn't been fantastic. Well, they've always had a good marketing and PR train going along, and they launched the special livery, Future Mode or whatever it was called, and it just looks so sexy on those marketing shots. I mean, it looked okay on the track. I can't even say I really noticed much difference, to be honest. When I saw it in
the
all
papaya
those...
still dominated during the race, right? It's hard to see all of the rest unless it was a close-up of the car. So to me, I agree with you. The pictures were fantastic. It was a cool livery. I mean, bring me back the golf livery they ran in Monaco last year. That was one of the greatest things ever. With the I loved it, but this papaya still dominated. So I just didn't see all of the purple and the jazz on the sides as much to me.
No, true. That was the fun side of things dominating kind of the Twitter this week.
God, I can't believe we have to talk about the next one.
We do have to talk about it, and it's Red Bull and Aston Martin being rumoured to have broken the cost cap in 2021. And oh my gosh, if the Twitterverse wasn't already on a meltdown over everything, this was just kind of Armageddon levels of explosions everywhere. It was all of the attacks on all of the buildings in Independence Day rolled into one big explosion. It was just huge. And the stupid thing is, of course, as soon as any kind of blood in the water, all the Red Bull haters come out. All of them come out. The fact that Aston Martin are rumoured in there as well, everyone's like, nah, Aston Martin.
I mean, the thing that blows my mind is the number of people seriously on Twitter predicting Lewis becomes the 2021 world champion on Wednesday. What?
And then you kind of dig around for a little bit, and unfortunately, anybody with any kind of common sense just gets kind of like shouted down. How dare you come round here with your common sense and your logical thinking? Get out, lynch him. And it's just, you know, those common sense ones you had to dig to go and find. There was somebody that was kind of writing on there saying, this is a new set of regulations. There are going to be loopholes and misunderstandings in these regulations. If you think that the FIA have issued a set of watertight, cast iron financial regulations at the first attempt, given their ability to do everything else in the sport, really? So in the same way that the genius people like Adrian Newey find the ways to exploit the regs for the cars, there's going to be the Newey equivalents of the accountants sitting in their little dark rooms counting beans and shuffling them around different spreadsheets. And they're going to have these things where they say, well, that guy kind of works for us on an F1 weekend, but actually majority of his responsibility is actually over there that's got nothing to do with F1, so we don't need to count him. And you'll get this creative accounting. And the FIA is going to look at it, I reckon, and they're going to go, I can see what you did there. It doesn't comply, but I don't see the punishments coming. I see this as being a slap on the wrists at the first attempt of auditing this first set of cost caps.
Yeah. Listener Lee was the first person to send me the minor and major version of the cost cap approach. And I don't think this is anything but a minor. This is just going to be a minor with a minor penalty. And everyone who keeps bringing up Abu Dhabi 2021 and thinks this will fix it, just like Lewis.
It's going to haunt me for life.
Yeah, so let's stop talking about it.
Do you think it's even going to be a minor? Or do you actually think it's going to be one of these things where the FAA look at it and go, oh, crap, yeah, we did leave that loophole open. It'll be one of these well, that wasn't in the spirit of the cost cap, so it'll be like a verbal slap on the wrist, but not even the minor, I think, for some of these.
I think we'll see a minor just because of the human element to Abu Dhabi. I think they have to be seen as being kind of strict by the book. And so they may interpret it as black and white as possible, and I could see somebody. And it may not be Red Bull for all we know. I mean, Toto's out there talking about making 40 people redundant and trying to amp the pressure up on the team, whomever it is in the spotlight. Who knows? But I think I do think it'll be Red Bull just based on the smoke around there that there might be fire. But I'm betting it's a minor at best.
Yeah, and if it is Red Bull, that means that. And this is bad for the integrity of the sport. That means somebody on the inside of the FIA is talking, because a bit like submitting your tax returns,
right?
No one sees any of this stuff. It's not like it goes. Point. And I saw Christian Horner being interviewed, I think yesterday, or was it this morning before the race, and they were talking about the cost cap piece. And he's saying, look, I couldn't possibly comment on any other teams on the grid because we don't see it. It's not public forum information. You submit your books, the auditors do their thing. Yes, they're going to take a look at everything to see where you've complied or where you haven't, and then we're all going to find out. I mean, even the FIA basically had to issue a tweet that basically said to everyone, please shut the F up and let us just get on with this.
That was so great. And then, of course, the tinfoil hats came out when they saw Mattia and Toto, being together and shaking hands and talking. Hashtag Bin Toto. And so they're scheming, and someone said, "Oh, I'll take 21 and you'll take 22." Get it? But anyway, I please just I honestly, unless it's a massive F up where someone overspent by $40 million or something, otherwise let's just move on.
Yeah, for me, it will be a first attempt for the FIA auditors to go and have a look at everyone's books. There will be some realignment where I think there probably will be some creative accounting, and some of them will be on the right side of creative and some of them will breach over to the wrong side. I wasn't seeing it as a minor. You might be right. Maybe there'll be a few minors dished out. But just to end on a humorous note, which we like to do on the dirty side, is that then all of a sudden it was flying around that Williams were suspected of it as well. And then it came out that apparently they just missed a deadline. They'd submitted something late. So they got fined, but there was no cost cap thing. And somebody
now,
said,
does the fine count against the cap? Is it a circular
but
reference?
They said it's lucky, really, because imagine overspending on that car and it still being a bag of bolts, which is a bit mean, but...
That is mean. All right. Well, one of the other things that has garnered a lot of conversation is the calendar. And obviously we covered this last week a bit, but we asked Pit Lane Paul for his perspective on the calendar for next year, and here it is.
Hey both. Rob asked me to do a little comment on the calendar once when that got released a few weeks ago. So I've been thinking about it and how best to put my angle across without sounding overly miserable. Here goes my attempt. So, okay, great. It's out, 24 races, no big shocks. But I mean, the only thing I would say is I think if South Africa we thought might have been on there in some angle, but it looks like that's off till next year, which is fine. But it's the crews that make the races happen that I actually feel sorry for, because when you watch these races, you turn on the TV on a Friday weirdly, and then obviously Saturday and Sunday, which are the 2 days you should have the TV on. You don't realise really the amount of work that goes in. I mean, I'm looking out the window now at the track here in Singapore. It's Wednesday evening, and some of the teams have been here now already 6-7 days setting up. So that's how long these races take to actually get together. As well as a lot of the core crews, so like the F1 cable riggers, they were here last Tuesday, so they've already been here 8 days already, and they'll be here for 8 days after the race is finished, and then they'll go off to Austin. So for these guys, it's hard. For the drivers, it's not so hard. It's they turn up on a Thursday, go home on a Sunday, and for an extra race, we can manage that side of it. That's fine. But the mechanics, yeah. And then the cost cap come in, so it's not like the teams can recruit a load more staff, and they can't say, okay, we'll give you better hotels, because they all cost money. So the cost cap really has limited what teams can do. So people say that you can leave because loads of people want to come in and do the job. That's a fair comment, but it's also really not fair. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the guys have built their families, they've built their lives around the career they do. When they had, say, 21 races, which, okay, was not so long ago, it's still a lot. So to downgrade, to leave, to go back to do a normal job, you're risking your family's I'd say well-being. I know it's so drastic, but it really is. So yeah, some people are a little bit stuck in what they're doing. In fairness, it's not all as everyone thinks, and it's those I feel sorry for. And everyone does it. It's fine. The calendar, it bamboozles me, the decision making with places when we're trying to push sustainability. We have Monaco in the middle of a triple header, which I just cannot understand and figure out logistically how that's going to work, because you just can't get things out of Monaco in time to get to Barcelona. This is the thing, we'll make it work, because that's what Formula One does, and everyone will pat each other on the back at the end of it, and hopefully we'll have no fatalities, because I've often said, and this is really dark, but that's the only way I think things get changed. And yeah, we do it, and then you guys turn on the TV, and the race goes ahead, and F1's the winner. But yeah, money talks. Calendar's fine from my side. We deal with it, but you keep increasing races. You introduce budget caps. It's at some point, you have to think of the well-being of the staff who are putting these events on for you. And like I've said, it's those I feel sorry for. But for the fans, great. Okay, it's more races the better, eh? But, yep, that's my side. Anyway, move on.
Wow. Here's a couple. So we have, that's a great sign off. Move on. That's actually going to be trumped by his later sign off from this week's review. So stick around for that.
When I listened to that, it was making me think that is the cost cap, should it be including things like the team's hotels and all the stuff that tries to make the guys that help put this show on, should they be impacted by this? Shouldn't the cost cap really be about development of the car to try to keep everyone as close as possible to competition? Does it really, it just got me thinking about all the things that must go into the cost cap and how many of them really need to be counted to try to do the spirit of what this thing is to do, which is try to keep the competition close, right?
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, at the end of the day, if they got to manage the cap against the expectation for the product. And whether that's the number of races, the quality of races, the quality of life of the people who work to make the races happen, if you're not balancing those two things, you're doing it wrong. So I think that's something they got to take into account. Moving on, friend of the pod, Jacques Villeneuve, as I tweeted out and we talked about last week, took the Alpine, last year's Alpine, around Monza. And it marked 25 years since his title. And I actually saw a video of him. I think I sent that out. I can't remember. He said it was amazing. The cornering speeds, the braking. He described having to tell himself to hold on using the brakes until later in the corners because of how strong those brakes are. I loved seeing it.
Oh, yeah, it was amazing. It was just, it was so good to see him still tearing it up. He's 51 now, right? And he's flying around Monza in last year's car. And it's, I thought, I watched that whole thing, that video, even though most of it was in French. But
I think Jacques should be the new, I know he's still racing actively, but the safety car driver.
Ooh, yeah. They always say they want it to go faster, then put an XF1 driver in.
Right?
Yeah. Talking about, well, we weren't talking about fun facts, but now we're talking about fun facts. This one just caught me out of nowhere, which was that someone just threw it out there. Here's a little one to make your brain hurt. When Piastri comes into F1 next year, and he lines up alongside Alonso, Alonso has been in F1 longer than Piastri has been on the planet.
Do you know something else they share? Neither one of them wants to be at Alpine.
Yeah, I saw that as well. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And Alonso obviously is a champion. What we did in the blog this week was we put the spotlight on all the greatest drivers that had never won the World Drivers' Championship. And I was kind of going through that, and it's all the likely candidates. A lot of kind of classic wingmen that kind of almost their job was to help win the constructors and sit along the number one driver. Rubens to Schumacher, Valtteri to Lewis. But it kind of got me thinking at the end was there's going to be a bunch of drivers that we're watching right now that we all think are super talented and have a drivers' championship inside them if they could just get in the right car, but that can't happen to everyone. So I put it out there, George, I worry for George right now, right? Which is that if he's Mr. Consistent and Mercedes look at him and say, well, he'll always get us the points in the bag, but he maybe just doesn't have that killer instinct to be right up at the front. If they replace Lewis with someone who comes in as a new number one, does George become on that list as well of like an amazing driver never to win the title?
I have someone even ahead of George personally.
Charles Chuck Leclerc.
We'll talk more about some stats later, but for me right now, this whole season, there are three drivers who I would put in my number one car in the number one seat. And Charles Leclerc is one of them, with Max being first and Lewis. And I recognize all the talent everybody else has, but to me, those are the three guys who are capable of winning the title. And I don't know what else they can throw at it from Ferrari at this point. Red Bull and Max are too good right now. And does Charles have a window? And how long is that window open? So anyway, I agree with you on George. So a couple things on social media that were fantastic. First off, Aston Martin had Green Day, the band, in the garage, and they were playing around with the steering wheel and a few other things. And Red Bull, social media champions they are, they wrote, well, it is the 1st of October after all, which means because, Green Day has the song Wake Me Up When September Ends. And so well done to Red Bull to just get in there. I think they even ratioed Aston on that one. I can't remember. It was such a good comment. And then 3 videos to check out that were just epic. One, and this is me kind of doing a mea culpa, How to Master the Singa-pour GP by Nico Rosberg. I am not really a big Nico fan. I don't know why. There's a lot of small reasons, but I watched this out of curiosity just to see how because he did win in 2016, and I don't mean the title, but he also won at Singapore, how he tackles it. It was really good. He had a lot of great insights, and I've seen him when he does commentary. He has a lot of great insights. It was epic. I may tune into more Nico videos to kind of get a feel for some of that. And then I sent this out Guess the Baby with Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo on the McLaren channel. Oh my God, was this great. And not just for Valtteri's picture, which was great, but the whole thing was funny. Rob, did you get a chance to see that video?
Yeah, I did. But it does that. The Valtteri, baby Valtteri, child Valtteri, sorry, just steals the show. It just
steals
amazing.
The show.
That haircut.
I mean, I did not know he was an extra in Dumb and Dumber, but okay. And then the last one that I also sent out earlier this week was remembering the notorious Singapore Sling chicane on the F1 channel. I miss that. I recognize you can't have it anymore, but I miss the idea of having a sausage curb grande so big that you would launch cars into the air, and they had videos of all these cars going airborne. And I know you can't do that anymore. You can't have a curb that dangerously close to a chicane like that you're going to run over it and go flying. But man, that was a great video to watch.
Yeah, and that leads us in nicely now to race weekend. We've got a lot to discuss and pick out of quali and the race, so I'm going to go super quick through practice, really, because I actually managed to catch all of it this week. But
wow, we're talking about practice.
Yeah, and Mercedes looked good in all three sessions. And Bottas was going really well as well. So yes. I was kind of looking at both of those and thinking, and Ferrari looked quick as well. So it was all the good things where you kind of take it with a pinch of salt because it's only practice. Free practice 3 was just wet, just very wet, which was going to be foreshadowing for things to come. It didn't dry out in time for quali, although it does drain ridiculously quickly. Yeah,
but it doesn't really dry. It drains, so it's not huge puddles, but then it just remains wet, especially the last sector.
Yes.
Because it's, I don't know why, but there's a million reasons, I'm sure. One thing that I did catch, so I did see a little practice myself. I had some people over Friday night, and on one of the TVs, I was just running FP1 and FP2 because I hadn't seen it yet, and just was playing them through. And I caught both instances of George going off at the same corner.
Yep.
And in FP1, he buried the nose in the wall. In FP2, he stopped just ever so short and missed it. But that, for me, was foreshadowing of a bad weekend to come for George.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, it's a good point you pick those up because really, when you start looking at quali, and this will come in, actually, we'll hit it in Q2, right? So Q1, like you say, it hadn't dried out. It was inters, but inters on grease. So it was all very tentative, but we did get excitement right at the death when I thought Valtteri had done it. I thought he'd got into Q2. He was there, and Mick Schumacher was on an absolute flyer and just stole it from Valtteri. So I think we had Latifi, Albon, Ocon, Ricciardo, which he'll come back. We'll talk about him later.
Yeah, seriously, amazing stat.
And Bottas out in Q1, and then we got Q2. And build on what you said, Brian, Q2 was really weird. And they even said it at the end of when they did the video review to follow George's lap. He didn't make any mistakes. He was just genuinely slow all the way around, as if he was just kind of like nervous about doing the same thing again and
right.
Going into the wall again, that exact same spot. So just seemed to drive at like 80% all the way around. And he kept coming on and saying, it's torque problems or it's this problem. He just didn't seem to generate any speed out of that car for some reason. I don't know why. I'm not an F1 driver, but it just looked odd compared to what Lewis was doing and what everyone else was doing on that in the same conditions. Everyone's out on inters. Everyone's still was wrestling with the surface, and George just didn't seem to get to grips with it.
And some people, well done. Some people did go to slicks, right? We saw Zhou Guanyu go to slicks. We saw both Astons go to slicks. They didn't make it through, but they had nothing to lose at the end, trying to see if they could find some extra seconds. And obviously, Mick went out, but obviously talking about Russell. And I did see a comment, which at the end of the race, which I'll say it now. So the Queen passes away, and George Russell forgets how to drive. And what happened to George Russell? What happened to him? This whole weekend was just so bizarre. Anyway, Q3, everybody's on slicks. Hamilton was looking quick. Still kind of a tire challenge, right? Trying to get the right slicks going. The tire board didn't work. Like on the side of the timing screen where they showed the tires they were on, in Q2 it was all inters, even though it wasn't. And at this point, they were really having trouble keeping up. And for a tire nerd like me, it was like I was panicking. Like, who's on what? I don't know. And
it was just an evolving track as well, wasn't it? Because people were just going faster and faster and faster as that kind of tires were coming into the temperature zone, and the track was obviously starting to dry on the racing line. And it was just really exciting. It was just really exciting. I was convinced Hamilton was going to get pole. I really was. He just seemed to have the bit between his teeth, and then all of a sudden you look down at the board, and I had to kind of like blink and take a double check because everyone's been within a couple of tenths, and Verstappen's on an absolute double purple wonder lap and is like 9 tenths up or something crazy. Now, we're not quite sure if they messed up. Was he 9 tenths up on his own best, or was he 9 tenths up on the pole? I think it should have been on pole.
I found there was telemetry data which showed when he was told to abort the lap, he was 5 tenths up on Charles. So he had it. Not on his best, he had it. And then they said abort the lap. And here, I'm going to show you what cost him 19 points this weekend. You ready? Here we go. I'm going to start taking a drink. Okay, that amount of fuel, it wasn't fuel I was drinking, but had it been, he would have had 19 more points and won the race. But so maybe I'm getting a conspiracy theory here, but because of this, I think the chain of events that got set off for Max, starting in 8th, finishing in 8th, or 7th, I think, and then all of that was because of where he started and the way he had to push. If he'd had that thimble more of fuel, if it was fuel, and been able to finish, been on pole, I think he toodles off into the sunset. He's a better driver than Checo, and Checo did that. So I can't imagine Max not winning this race handily if he had, a millimeter, or that's the wrong measurement, a little tiny bit more of fuel. I think he wins.
Yeah, and I think they were saying, I was listening to Christian Horner being interviewed about it, saying, like, how can you mess up like that when you've got all these technicians looking at the telemetry, you know how much fuel is in there and blah, blah, blah. And it looks like because they took that extra lap and something to do with because the track is evolving, the cars are going quicker, I think they must be burning at a slightly higher rate. There was even something that I didn't even understand, which was something to do with intermediate tyres having the different radius or whatever, and the amount of fuel calculation can get. I mean, I thought that's Brian territory. That's something about tyres, and I'm not interested. But if it all plays into, at the end of the day, like Christian Horner said, every F1 team is just one moment away from making a screw up, and we screwed up. And I thought, fair play. They just held their hands up and gone, yeah, we screwed up. So
Max
we move on.
Apoplectic on the radio.
He did, and like they said, I mean, we've probably all worked with colleagues like this, but Christian was there saying, look, that's Max. He's very, very super competitive, and when stuff like that happens, he just needs to vent. So you let him go off, you let him blow his valve somewhere, and then he'll come back and he'll be the uber professional again, and off you go again. So you can see that. He was obviously, he knew he was on a flying lap, and he knew it's a screw up that's got nothing to do with him that took it away. So anywho, we then come through to this morning, which we kind of already covered a little bit, where I sat down and turned the TV on and saw nothing but Noah's Ark level of water. It was just, when that rains, it rains. I mean, that was insane what was coming down there.
So as we get into this, a quick question for you, my British friend. Raffles Boulevard. How would you pronounce the word boulevard?
Boulevard.
Well, then why does Crofty call it a boulevard?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, potato. It's just some people like to emphasize it's a French word, so some people tried to go down the French way of saying it.
Every time they were crossing Raffles Boulevard, I imagined a drunk clown named Raffles loitering up and down the street. I'm like, Raffles Boulevard? Anyway, sorry.
Well, talking about Crofty, I think it was him that actually, because they had nothing to do and they needed to come up with little facts, although this actually could have even been from yesterday, and I've just morphed everything all into one now, but little fact about the track, which, because there's a subway there, and because of the magnetic field that it generates, they were saying that the cars have to have special equipment to basically wrap gearboxes and anything electrical. Basically, it almost has to have kind of like shielding around it to make sure that it doesn't interfere with it. That's just nuts.
Yeah, that is nuts.
That probably actually means as well that the cars run slightly heavier, I guess, in Singapore, because that stuff's going to weigh stuff. It's not going to be like zero weight stuff, right?
Right.
But anyway, little things like that, and just, trying to pass the time while the rain's coming down, and texting Paul saying, are we even going to race today? But we did. Now, I got to ask you here, Brian, because you are a tyre fan.
Yeah.
If you were a full wet tyre, Are you going to
Would
be
you
like
feel
that
sad
meme
about
of
your spot in
Kermit?
life?
Are you,
Yeah.
you know, there's that meme of Kermit looking at a rain window, just like pining into the distance, going, "I wish I was out there playing." Blue tyres, what have they done wrong?
I
They
don't
don't
know.
get to come out and play anymore now. They are specifically designed to run in this water, and ironically, they want the track to drain, and the thing that's proven to displace water the most is a train of F1 cars going around in full wets. Why don't they just start on the... Why do we, in these days, wait until water's gone till we get down to the inters level before we start a race? I mean, if you want to do a cost cap and you want to save money, just stop producing wet tyres, because no one uses them anyway.
Yeah, great question. I don't understand why they won't start with the blues. And I think, I'm guessing it's wrapped in a safety kind of conversation where we can start the race when we want to start the race. However, if the rain comes during the race, I think that's when you would see the blues if needed, if it's coming down heavy and it's beyond an inter situation.
That makes
I
no
agree.
sense.
I'm with you. I'm with you, Rob.
The
It makes
blues,
no sense.
if it rains during the race, the blues are okay, but if it rains before the race, then the blues are banned.
I mean, it's my best interpretation of what they're doing. I have no idea. I mean, it seems as though that, like you said, even in Monaco, right? That's why I said this was Monaco 2.0. Street track, not normally known for a ton of overtakes. The rain kind of made it interesting. But they held the race for an hour both times. And both times we started, I think we started with some more blue stripes in Monaco, and then you remember the shift, the inters, and then the shift that Charles got hosed on. To the slicks, but yeah, I don't know. I agree with you; it doesn't make sense. But Checo started great. He passed Charles, who seemed to bog down in the next gear shift, and Max went backwards from 8th, fell 4 spots. Lewis is moaning on the radio about tires the whole race. I mean, I've never seen a guy complain about tires as much as Lewis did in this race. He just continually did it. And then by lap 4, everybody was spread out so insanely far apart. And then
they
lap
were all
5,
just tiptoeing around, aren't they?
Yeah.
It just like they're all just feeling their way around. It was like, are we watching? Is this under safety car? I'm not quite sure, because nobody seemed to be going that quick at this point.
Then Crofty notices it. He goes, everybody's spread out pretty far. And then what was fascinating to me is just, again, the reruns. It felt like the way the race was handled was Monaco 2.0. But then K-Mag very quickly ends up getting a black and orange flag. And he gets his black and orange flag because his wing, the wingtip side thing, was dangling off, which is exactly what happened to him in Canada, which was the last time he was on my fantasy team. So thanks, Kevin Magnussen.
Yeah, and then talking of K-Mag, it kind of all started snowballing from there. At that point, they zoomed in on him, and it's like, what's going on with that? And then before we had it, we've got, they said Georgia was that the one when they said Georgia got a puncher and said that he's...
Or they said he spun and we didn't know what had happened. He was just going down the timing board. And then we see a picture of Joe pulling over. And then they yelled, Latifi's got a puncture. And I'm like, what is happening at this point? The whole world is coming to an end. Everyone is falling at the same time. But then we saw the video and Latifi.
I know it's bad conditions and I know the spray, but I'm sure that he just didn't see him. He just drove straight into Joe and he's got nowhere to go. It's like, well, I can turn left, but there's a massive wall there.
That's right. I can't make my car invisible real fast. And then Nikki did say, I didn't see him there. But a lot of people on Twitter took to can we teach him how to use mirrors at this point, or is it too late? That was rough. And we got a full safety car. And Kevin Magnussen got screwed because he had pitted one lap before that to fix his wing. If he'd done it under the safety car, he would have made out like a bandit. And then Max got on his horse and took Pierre as soon as the safety car ended. And what was fascinating to me is at this point, Checo was putting on a class of driving on the wets and street tracks, again, like Monaco, where he won. I mean, that's why I'm saying there's so many parallels to Monaco from this year. But the thing that I started noticing, and I'm a Carlos fan, okay? Not a huge one, but I like him. I cheer him on. I want him to do well. However, he is always, and I take Silverstone out of it, okay? When he won and went off into the sunset, take that one race away. Whenever he's behind Charles, he just falls further behind quickly.
Yeah.
And they're on the same tires, on the same track, in the same car. And the next thing you know, the biggest gap on the track is from Charles to Carlos. So Charles is sticking his bumper right onto Checo's bumper, and they're tootling off, doing their thing, looking like the class of the racetrack. And then there's this giant gap, and then there's Carlos. And I say giant gap, it's 4 seconds, but it develops every time the safety car ends. So it wasn't just once, and it wasn't just twice. 3 times this gap developed. So to me, that was really telling about, again, who has the pace, who has the talent. Amongst teammates, it was a big gap.
Yeah, and I'll come on to Charles when we get towards the end. There's something, I don't know, something that seems to be missing from his race car makeup, I think, which we'll cover later. So where were we? We were just out of safety car. Everything's starting to fall into line again. Sainz is falling way behind Charles. It's normal, and then all of a sudden, Alonso parked at the side of the car, the side of the track with 0 engine left. Interesting they used VSC there because that didn't look like it was going to be easily recoverable, but then when it kind of panned out, I think there was an exit road just there, so it was kind of like, okay, makes sense, let's do the VSC. But a bit like you always say, whenever that VSC flags up, I'm kind of, okay, so what, full safety car in like...
And they went yellow at first, and then I'm like, how long till they figure out what they're going to do? But then they went VSC pretty quick. The only person who went to the pits was George. And he put the yellows on, the mediums on yellows. I'm still going with the color of the tires because of the blue thing. So they put mediums on lap 22. And the best chef's kiss job. He comes out of the pits. He's like, he can still see the pits in his mirrors. And he's sliding sideways as though it's on ice and snow. I'm like, oh, this is going to work great.
It was just another it was the latest... feature of George's awful weekend. It was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, I'm not really driving very well. I haven't got any pace. Let's gamble and be the first ones out on the mediums. I can do this. No, you can't, George. And it just, I don't know. It just kind of trundled around then, didn't he? For
a little bit. And then he starts getting some heat in the tires. We think something might happen. And then Albon puts it in the wall. He's got a puncture. He's got no wing. He's got no appendix. And so then they kind of keep going. A VSC, does anyone come in? Nope. But Albon had to retire. They run one more lap, and you're thinking, all right, tell me how the mediums are going, George. And then Esteban has an engine failure, which, by the way, on the replay was an epic cloud of smoke.
When they say an engine lets go, you have that picture in the dictionary definition next to it, because
that was the real deal. That was bigger than a plume. That was a cloud. And but that was one lap later on 28, and again another VSC. And Ferrari sent mechanics out. The only people who stopped were K-Mag and George at all at this point. No one came in on this VSC. So we've gone 30 laps, almost half distance. The only people who have pitted were Kevin Magnussen, who had to pit, and George, who was so far behind, he was just giving data to Lewis, effectively, to test out the medium-striped tires. I'm so confused at this point. Everyone's sticking on these inters, and Brundle had a great point. It's still too wet for slicks. But would you pit for inters when in reality, pretty soon, everyone thinks they're pitting for slicks? So it's just like, let's burn these things out until it's time for the next pit. So everyone is like, crossing their fingers and pointing at the pit stop, like, I'm not going in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they're thinking, like, if I keep burning some tread off these inters, and they'll eventually kind of become like pseudo slicks, and I can just ride it out for a little bit longer. It was just that whole playing the lottery of, we know we're not there yet, but you, like you say, you do not want to burn another pit stop to put fresh inters on, because they're literally going to be pointless probably in like another 5-10 laps.
Exactly, and that's you nailed the math. That's exactly what happened, and that's what people did. Max got right up behind Lando by lap 32, so now over halfway into, if they'd done the full race, we obviously time shortened it, but if they'd done the full race at this point, I just got to bring this up again. Charles is running in second. Carlos is in third. 17-second gap.
Oh, I know. That's
huge. And George, after all of his shenanigans and ice skating around on cold medium tires, which no one will let him get warmed up because he had 74 safety car VSCs, he was 53 seconds behind Magnussen. Oh my God, that's a lot. And I recognize why, but just threw the whole weekend away, and it just kept getting worse. And then Lewis went into the barrier. Yeah, go on.
Lewis went into the barrier, right? But I've seen that now. I've watched it a couple of times on the replay. He doesn't go in like at zero pace. Yes, he doesn't go in at like 80 miles an hour pace, but he goes in with some decent pace.
Yes.
how does that front nose, that front wing stay intact?
No idea.
Literally, when it went in, I was like, oh, here we go, safety car, that's Lewis screwed. And then he kind of like backs out. Nothing to see here, everyone.
And pulls into traffic. That's the best part. He backs out and he goes, I'm good. And he takes off. And Max and Lando in front, Max behind, had been battling. He somehow gets in the middle of that. I don't understand how that happened. And then his wing starts bobbing off. And then Max, once again, is the front wing whisperer. You know, he's got to pit. He's got to pit. He's got to get him out of here. I mean, he was behind Kevin when he told him his wing was falling off. And then George starts doing a little better. And this is, like you said, this is when it got exciting in my mind. When all of the pit stops started. We had Tsunoda and Bottas, and then Charles came in for mediums, ! A leader, you know, not the leader, but one of the leading pair coming in. And I'm like, all right, gonna be good. And then Yuki went straight into the barrier.
And that's why I referenced the 80 miles an hour, because I think they said that's how fast he decided to kiss the barrier. And you kind of, like the onboard looked very, very similar to Lewis's. And it's like, oh, will he survive? And then it kind of panned back a bit and like, both wheels are at the wrong angle. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, okay.
And the barrier is like really dented, you know, like pushed inwards, and it was a full safety car. And at this point, a couple things, right? There was a great video of a marshal on the side of the track who could see Yuki go in, but just keeps waving his green flag. The green flag keeps going the whole time. I mean, Yuki's getting out of the car. The dude's still waving the flag, or woman. There's, you know, the highest proportion of women marshals there. Somebody is waving the hell out of a green flag. Made no sense. At this point, it was pointed out that Mick was the only Singapore rookie still running. Everybody else whose first time there was now crashed or crashed. And then McLaren, who had a great day, really benefited from the safety car.
I was going to say, they weren't having an amazing day at this point, but if you talk about safety cars and timing, and sometimes you're on the right side of timing and sometimes you're on the bad side of timing, this was just perfect for them, wasn't it? It was just exactly the right time, right place on track, and they came in, they made hay while the sun shines.
It was amazing. It was perfect for them. They had a great day, especially a great day for them where they finished 4th and 5th, but an even better day when their constructor championship rival didn't finish at all. Alpine had 2 DNFs. And then, you know, we see Max trying to make it back up to the front. He's in 5th place, and he has the world's biggest lockup. I think that's a record for this calendar year, 2022. He locked up from basically Singapore all the way to the next race in Japan. He just kept sliding, and those things were bricks. He turned them into squares. He actually said, I have to pit. It was that bad. He's like, I can't, they're done.
And there were 2 parts to that. There was the length of that slide, and he was lucky that he does that in a point where there's the exit road, right?
Exactly.
I know maybe when he makes the decision to try and take Lando, part of it is with the fact that if I balls this up, there's an exit point here. I'm not going to try and do it on a corner where there's nothing but wall. But anyway, still, he avoids everything beautifully and just goes down the middle of it. And then he like donuts round. And that exit road only seemed about the width of a car. So he kind of like donuts that thing round and doesn't make any contact with any barriers. But I'm not surprised his tyres were toast at that point, because not only had he slid on them for 16,000 miles, he then like donutted round on them as well.
And he only fell to 8th. So kudos. I mean, I gotta love Max. He's just, even when he messes it up, he still doesn't mess it up that badly. And then we had George and Mick make contact, and George, I still think, moved into Mick when you watched the replay. He did not?
I agree. I think on the commentary they actually said when the radio came on and George said, "What happened there?" and the commentary team went, "Well, you turned right into him, George."
I didn't hear them say that, but he literally moved into him. Tires hit each other, and both of them ended up getting punctures. George's faster than Mick's. Mick's had a slow puncture as well. And at this point, George is pitting for, I don't know, the 75th time. He's hit every barrier. He's crashed into everything. He's tried every tire they have. Nothing was working. And then this is, for me, the most exciting part of the front end of the race was Checo and Charles. And Charles was right on his tail. There's only 30 or so minutes left. Now we're in the counting down time as opposed to knowing what lap we're on. And I was excited. I thought we might have something here. I thought Charles was bringing the race to Checo. Turned out not.
Yeah, so, and this is what I mentioned earlier about Charles. So DRS gets enabled. Charles is hunting him down. He has a couple of times where he has a little look, whether it's just one of those kind of bluffing looks just to appear in Checo's mirrors, and Charles is there. And I'm thinking, this is going to happen because Charles has got him. He's staying 0.5, 0.6 seconds behind him all the way. Perez is going to crumble in a minute. And then Charles made the same mistake, I think, twice in as many laps, where he went into that one corner too much, twitchy bum time at the back of the car. He kind of catches it, and then he falls to like 1.8 seconds. Okay, fine. And even the commentary team are going, well, now he's just going to have to eat his way back into that DRS zone and go for the chase again. Only he couldn't. I don't know what happened there. Has Charles just not got the racecraft to be... Because that car hadn't suddenly got any slower. That's the same car that he's been hunting Checo down for the previous however many laps. And now with the benefit of DRS. And DRS wasn't keeping him up with Checo. It was giving him the opportunity to try and overtake it.
And it's not like Checo has DRS.
Yeah. So... I don't know what it's like. Did those two wobbles knock his confidence or what? But all of a sudden he just kind of went, "Oh well, I tried. I tried." Carlo is 6 years behind me, so he's not going to catch me.
After the Yuki safety car, once again the third time Charles had opened up this huge gap on Carlos. But yeah, and maybe hear me out. Maybe Checo, when they said you're under investigation for the last safety car infringement, open up some time. Maybe Checo has another gear, he himself, not his car. And or maybe they do in the Red Bull. We should investigate this. Is there extra gear?
Are you wearing a tinfoil hat there?
Yeah. I still have it on from the earlier note. But so, yeah, maybe it was just Checo pulling away. Maybe Checo was saving tires. I don't know.
Maybe, but I think I need to double check this. I'm pretty sure they said when Ferrari radioed through to Charles and say he might be getting penalties, basically don't let him disappear into the distance because he might be getting penalties. Charles didn't really up his lap time.
Well, maybe he didn't have anything else. Maybe he was going as fast as, and that's why he had those wobbles. Maybe he was on the edge, the razor's edge of controlling that Ferrari. I don't know.
Going all the way back to the beginning when we talked about the blog and the drivers that might be the greatest drivers never to win the title, I worry that Charles hasn't quite got what it takes to that last little bit, because if he
to win a title or be considered great.
Maybe both. So he does two wobbles, and then what? That's it. He's lost his confidence, and he doesn't want to push it. He'd rather not bin it into the wall than chase Checo down. I mean, any serious contender is going to do anything they can to try to pull back in on Checo, and he just seemed to accept it. It just sort of settled into, oh well, I'll bring this thing home now.
To that, I do agree, and I would have to say, will he? I had such confidence that Charles would be, at the beginning of this year, not this year's champion, but would be a champion one day. And as I think about it now, it's... No! I don't know.
So then what we basically got was the best action for the last few laps was really the Max show, just how far through could he recover. And that actually gave us some good moments. I did. I really enjoyed the Max, Lewis, Seb, three cars all kind of going for it. You knew that Lewis was catching Seb, but he has to have one eye in his mirror because he's got Max swarming all over him. And then Lewis, again, easy for us to say because we don't drive it, but that seemed to be, like Brundle said, the one part of the track that won't dry out until tomorrow morning when the sun comes up, because it's literally got nothing on it to
he's like,
dry
I'm going
to
take a line into this corner no one's ever seen before.
Guess how that ended, Lewis.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same thing Max did, right? Max tried to be the king of the late breakers and slid all the way off, into the South China Sea. But then you've got Lewis trying to do the same thing, and he went flying through. If you're Max, you're sitting in the car watching, you're like, where is he going? And then you see him lose. He can't make the corner, and you see him just sliding away, and you're like, I mean... he had to yell a bunch of profanities at Lewis. Why would you try that, man?
And then they didn't really cover it too well because we saw it in the little mini screen on the left-hand side, the actual overtake on Vettel. But Seb was doing making his car 3 times as wide and was just pure Seb masterclass in inferior machinery. And Vettel and Verstappen just didn't seem to have a way past him. And it was like, okay, I think Seb might do this. Then all of a sudden he was past him. I was like, okay, it must have been something amazing. When they showed the replay, it was just like Max just rocket shipped past him.
Right. Well, just Seb had been doing great defense. You're right. I didn't really see him a special move that Max did. Earlier, Max had been behind Fernando until the engine blew. But Fernando had made his car humongously wide as well. And my favorite one that got very little attention because it was at the back is George was behind Valtteri forever. And George was just stuck there. And he's like, oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have taken this seat because then I wouldn't be behind this guy again or something. I mean, it was wild.
Yeah, well, fair play to Checo, amazing win, and here we are recording this about 16,000 hours after the race. They finally agreed that Checo won it.
5-second penalty, but since he had 7 seconds on Charles, he still won the race.
So brilliant for Checo. It was amazing. It must be so mentally difficult to drive a race like that, and with the humidity and just the the stress it takes on the body. I mean, it was an amazing drive from him. And here's a little fact before you get into your SAP stats that I saw as well from our friend Nate at ESPN. First double Ferrari podium since Miami, which was May.
May?
It's since
October.
Both Ferraris have been... Yeah, we're in October now. That's insane given how they started the season. But
Maybe they're big Green Day fans and they just needed to be woken up when September ended.
you tried the joke twice now.
SAP stats, Checo wins the GP edition. So as we looked at the Singapore GP, I do have a handful of stats here. So Checo was the first Singapore Grand Prix winner to start from an even-numbered grid slot. And this one I have to give to Crofty, who said that during the race. He started second, took the lead at the start, and led from there. So interesting. That's weird. No one's ever won from an even-numbered grid spot, but okay, that's over now. He was the 58th driver to lead a race from start to finish. There was one other one this year. 57th was Charles, the 57th driver, do it in Australia, which was also an interesting kind of race, although that one I thought was boring. Tonight was Leclerc's third consecutive podium. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second. Third consecutive podium, but in each of those three, he's finished second to a Red Bull driver. Danny Rick, tonight was his first top 5 finish since Saudi Arabia 2021. And if you remember, Saudi Arabia moved in the calendar. So it was later last year. It was early this year. So it's not quite as long as you might think. But here's the cool thing. He finished 5th. He started 17th on the grid. Danny Rick. 17th of 5th. I mean, that deserves more attention than I think it's getting.
That deserves a shoey.
Podium only?
I don't know. Does it have to? I think he's not going to get another podium this year. But that was an amazing drive, like we said. Like the pit stop. Okay, you can't put it all on one lucky pit stop timing wise. You still had to drive the wheels off that car, and McLaren looked pretty good around there. Both him and Lando, they were up there on merit / cheap pit stop. But so what? Lots of people get cheap pit stops.
That's how the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, exactly.
Aston Martin, Lance Stroll, he was 6th. Best result of the year. He's finished 10th on 5 occasions so far this year, and we've actually talked about it on this here pokey little podcast, that he's finished 10th a boatload. I almost used a different word there. And Lando's finished 7th a bunch, and both of them improved on those marks.
And Vettel was in the points as well. So Aston Martin getting
double
both
points.
Cars. Yeah.
At one point, before Max took his spot, it was Lando, Danny, Lance, and then Seb. And so they had those 4 in a row, and then Max came in there and took that spot off Seb at the end. So George Russell failed to finish in the top 5 for only the second time in 2022. He retired on lap 1 when that crash, when he crashed with Zhou at Silverstone. And we put a poll out. We put a poll in the field after quali when George was going to start, I think, 11th, before he took the penalties to start on pit lane. 55% of you thought he'd finish 5th or better, because I think we've all, and that's how I voted. We've seen so much consistency from George. 36% of people on Twitter who took the poll said he'd be P6 or worse, and 9% said DNF.
I was a DNF.
You voted DNF?
Yeah, the way that he'd kind of been so tentative in qualifying, I just didn't think that this was going to be his weekend. I could see him binning it into the wall, but happy to be wrong, but not like he got into the top 5.
That's a terrible race. And so here's my last stat, and I'm going to have to play this one again for who
Charles
it's about.
Chuck Leclerc.
This is a crusher. And so I went and did the math. I just went and grabbed this before we started. Charles has 9 poles this year. 9 times. 9. Max has 4. Max has 11 wins. 11. Charles has 3. Oh my gosh. Like that. I recognize the strategy and the reliability and all of the different things that are outside of his control. But that is just epically. I don't even know how to calculate this stat, like in my head, how to compute what this 9 poles. You have more than 2x the poles of the other guy, and he has 3, almost 4x your wins.
Yeah, like I say, a Ferrari fan. I really like Charles, but I just worry that it doesn't seem to be able to thread it together consistently. And that's the thing about race weekend. It's not race weekend, sorry, race day. On the Sunday, it's nothing about that one-off lap that you can pull together in quali, which he's obviously brilliant at. You've got to string that, and not quali pace, but actually not far off. When you compare the pole position time with the lap times it's a couple of seconds behind, but you've got to do that consistently for whatever it is, whatever the distance of the race is, 53 laps, 77 laps, whatever it is, you've got to be on it for the vast majority of those laps. And Charles is on it for a lot of them, but then a lot of silly little mistakes like the double twitches today when he's in striking distance. And I don't know, I just worry that it's not going to happen for him.
Yeah. Well, that's the way Rob and I saw the race, but how about we get a perspective of an expert?
Well, that's Singapore done. It's good to be back here, that's for sure. It's a city that is super clean, super efficient, and sadly super humid. Chewing gum's banned here, so the streets are not covered, neither can you find any under tables, and there's a language here called Singlish, which is a cross between, Singapore and English. Should have been a thing for every country we go to, I think, and maybe Max should have learned some Singlish before his post-quali event yesterday, but more on that. Friday, two most exciting things were the rain and the allegations of teams breaking cost cap rules. I'm not shocked if some are found guilty on this, but it goes back to the episode with Jack where he said there was not a real punishment on the table already, so that'll be quite good to see how it develops. Saturday came, more rain, lots of rain. Dried up and quite saw some weird cars drop out random times. George Russell, for instance, who probably drove super slow so he could take his top off a little earlier than normal, but that's a disappointing effort from him. He would be sad. Quali 3, Alonso flirted in the front row. It was brilliant. Lewis showed real pace and looked on course. Red Bull then had their issue. If you don't flush a toilet here in Singapore, by the way, that comes a fine of 150 Singapore dollars, and Max should have been fined for his potty mouth rant yesterday. Now look, Bray could have a good view on this, but from my side, I find it incredible if Red Bull made a mistake fueling the car. It totally made sense, but for a team like them, I'm just not having it. The engineering group they have, the expertise, but, for me there was something more to that. It might have been honest, but okay. So his rant was a bit justified. But as a driver, you're in the zone, you forget these messages are available all over the world. So he needs to think what he says, how he says it. That just makes the team look stupid. But again, it's understandable. And then the race, all was going well until that wet stuff came along about 6:45 local time. And as I said, when it rains here, it rains well. And the race actually promised loads, wet Inter to dry, but it dried a little to what we call Singapore level, where it was just Inters. And that meant the most boring race, as it would take ages for it to dry due to the humidity. It's a huge gamble to, literally that you do. So when George came in, it was purely based on numbers. Is he going faster than you? And eventually, yes, he did. Then everyone came in, but George's tyres took 10 laps to get anywhere near the temperature, let alone the dryness. So, the obvious happened. Safety car crash city. Yuki brought out the latest of the safety cars. I've no idea who would end up where. It was pretty fascinating. Actually came a bit exciting. We had a proper tyre battle with softs, mediums. DRS took an age to come alive, and I sort of see that because offline it was so greasy and walls each side and hungry drivers. It's understandable but frustrating. Perez has got his safety car infringement, so we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe a 5-second, which he cleared at the end of the race anyway. I got no idea what rule he broke. And for us, shame to miss out with Valtteri from a return to the points. As for Zhou, we got Latifi'd. Look, we now go to Japan, one of the golden races. The atmosphere is brilliant. It's honestly one of the best ones. Will Max win a championship there, or will he hold off until Austin, where I predicted he would in the summer? So speak soon all, get me out of these pants. Gipping.
Get me out of these pants. And I would just like to clarify, those are UK pants he's referring to there, so his underwear. I didn't even want to go down that rabbit hole any further and think about pulling his pants or getting out of them. So let's swiftly move on, shall we?
I think that's a great idea.
And we move on to where Paul was alluding, which is Japan. We will be going to Japan next week. One of my favourite circuits, Brian. Absolutely, hands down, Suzuka is one of my favourite tracks on the calendar. So I'm really, despite the fact it's going to be 1 a.m. for me, I am really looking forward to staying. I might have to do a tactical nap.
Are we going to do this? Are you and I going to do the plan we talked about where we watch together?
I think we need to watch together just to try to keep each other awake because it could be a difficult shift. I'm not saying we do the live podcast because that could be bad. I think if we're both half awake, that might not work out too well. But
we will at least stay up and watch and keep in touch with each other.
Oh, yeah, I've got to watch it in real time. There's none of this kind of waking up in the morning and watching it on replay, right? This is,
I'm with you.
Woo. Okay, so Japanese Grand Prix has been on the calendar since 1987. It had a couple of little intermittent showings in the 60s and the 70s, and down the years. Some of them have been at Fuji Speedway, but the fans love Suzuka, and they've kind of wrestled it away, and it's been at Suzuka, I think, ever since somewhere in the mid-2000s when Fuji had its last one. They do 53 laps of a 3.6-mile circuit, which is the only figure-of-8 circuit on the calendar. And I don't know why, but the little kid in me that used to set up those Scale-Electric slot car things, whenever I built a track, it always had a bridge, and it was always a figure-of-8. And I love Suzuka because it's got that bridge where we get to see the cars go under the track. I mean, it's totally childish, but I love it.
I love it too. It's a great course. It is a great course.
Anyone that's ever seen it will know, I'm going to call it the big wheel, the Ferris wheel, as we would say in the States, I guess. It's just iconic that you see the amusement part that's right by the track. But the big thing about Suzuka, and I know, who was that guy that was a world champion that we had on the pod, Brian?
Jacques Villeneuve?
That's the fella, yeah. He was talking about Suzuka being one of his favourite and just the speed of some of the corners. So I just picked out kind of three pieces that I know a lot of the drivers kind of will call out, which is, first off, you've got the S's, which is corners 3 through 7, which are taken at ridiculous speed, but essentially flip left, right. There's multiple switches of direction. And apparently the G-force there alone is absolutely insane as you're going back and forth at different speed. Then you take the spoon curve, 13 to 14, which is not flat out. You have to make sure you don't get too hesitant on the brakes, because what you need to do is carry the momentum through that corner into the infamous 130R. And I picked this up. This isn't mine. I picked this up off the Tinterweb somewhere, which says that from an engine perspective, this is a straight. 130R is a straight because it is flat out. The engine essentially thinks it's just flying along a straight, but it is a corner, so it's got G-force. So you are doing flat out, round to the left, probably with your skull trying to go out to the right. And it's very long. It's like 1,250 meters long corner straight, which you then essentially go into a mega braking zone for the chicane before you go down the pit lane straight. And there's a video, if you go and look up on YouTube, you can easily find it if you put 2005 Alonso Schumacher 130R. Alonso famously overtook Michael Schumacher on the outside of this corner, which is basically, no one ever really thinks you can overtake around the outside of there, but Alonso in his Renault, I remember watching it live, and it was absolutely amazing. So those are my pieces. What do you like about it, Brian?
Well, I just love watching from Suzuka. It's been a favorite track of mine from video games since I was a kid, and so it's one of the best to race on video games. And so in real life, it's just fun to watch as well. In 19, last time we were there, Valtteri won from Seb and Lewis. It's usually pretty late in the calendar. And just in terms of title opportunities, Max would need to outscore Charles by 8 and Checo by 6 to be crowned the 2022 champion in Japan. But I'm going to echo something Paul said. I think we're going to Austin for the title decider. I think he nailed that. I hate to give him too much credit because he just, inflates his ego. But I think he got that right from predictions this summer. I think we're going to Austin for Max to win the title. The repeat winners list, Schumacher's won 6 times, and I don't mean Mick or Ralph or David. Hamilton's won 5. Seb's won 4. A handful of people have won twice, Fernando being amongst them. And then Valtteri is the only current driver with only one win there. We've seen a variety of constructors win there. McLaren's won the most at 9. But it's going to be a fun race. And speaking of constructors, before I want to leave Japan. Anything else you want to hit?
Well, just going to, on the constructors one, it is kind of insane when, like you said, McLaren are the top constructor with 9, but Ferrari are the second constructor with 7. And as you just said, Schumacher has won with 6. So in the whole history of racing at Suzuka, Schumacher has won 6 out of 7 for Ferrari. Mercedes have won 6, and Hamilton's got 5. So it's it's one of those tracks that hasn't got a huge number of different winners. We've got a lot of winners that have won lots of times, but I don't think we need to be going out on a limb here to kind of say that it's probably going to have a new name added to the list this year. Whether it's Max, right, whether it's a Ferrari, whether it's Checo, it's going to come from one of those 4, I would say, because I don't see, despite the recent resurgence, I don't see Mercedes or anybody else having the straight line speed to be able to compete with the rocket ship. So it's going to be Red Bull 1-2 unless there's some weirdness going on, right?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that's a great prediction. I think Ferrari has a shot. Although you predicted, speaking of Mercedes, you predicted Lewis doing something pretty big this week on Singapore. How'd that
my tweet, in fairness, was made before the rain came down this morning. So my tweet I thought I threw out there last night was Lewis to take the lead by the first corner. Wow, wow, wow. Lewis to win and become the first 300 driver to do it.
The real sound for you when you finish.
Lewis to win.
The price
and
is right.
Max to DNF, but not through his own fault, but by being taken out because he was down in the midfield. Go on one more time.
You want it again?
Yeah.
A double hit. Here we go.
The last thing on the tweet, which is the only semi-silver lining redeeming one, 2 full safety cars.
And that's what so...
Oh, come on, with the cheers.
I gave you a Marv Albert yes. Is that not good enough?
Okay, fair enough.
So actually kind of looking at, we're moving back to Singapore a little bit here. What I started looking at the season as a whole really fast, and I thought to myself, what's left, right? We know Max is going to win. And if you look at the driver standings, right now Max is really far clear of Charles in second. But Checo has now cruised up behind Charles. They're 2 points apart. So second place is something to play for in the driver standings. And that's, yes, we remember the champions more than second place, but there's nothing wrong with finishing second versus third and trying to get the silver medal for the season. So I'm curious to see if Checo can kind of take it to Charles to close the season. They're 2 points apart, 237, 235, super close. And then the other battle that I find interesting is even closer. George in fourth, again, having never won a race this year at 203 points, actually having never won a race ever in F1, right? Right, because he finished second in the Williams in the rain-shortened Spa, and that was it. Okay, so George in fourth, 203, and Carlos in fifth at 202. So basically, I'm going to be watching the Ferrari boys, and if they can take second and fourth, or if they're going to finish third and fifth. And the last thing that I'm kind of watching is constructor. There's really not a lot in the top. Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, I think they're pretty much going to finish in that order. The gaps are pretty significant. However, what's really cool because of what happened today, not cool for Alpine, but with Alpine's double DNF and McLaren double points and good ones, McLaren jumped Alpine for fourth. So 129 to 125. And though there's a battle down at 8th, 9th for Haas and AlphaTauri, but let's be honest, it's going to be for fourth place is what we'll be watching, the constructor, McLaren and Alpine. So I think those are really the battles to watch as we finish out the year. I mean, what do you think, Rob?
No, I agree. And it makes it even more disappointing, Charles' performance today, because he is trying to hold on to that second, but he knows first is gone. Okay, fine, you're going to have to deal with that disappointment and move on. But the guy that is going to pip you for second is that car that you're staring at the exhaust of right now.
Yeah.
So go chase it down and overtake it, but it just didn't happen. So I think Alpine... if we're going to do little mini predictions before we close out today, I think Alpine's straight line speed, providing their engines don't let go again, as happened to Alonso today, I see them skipping back over McLaren again next week, because I just think that's going to favour them at Suzuka a bit more. Not to say that, we've got lots of different types of tracks left ahead of us, but I think next week is an Alpine over a McLaren.
Let's do this really fast. Rest of year, just of these three battles. So constructor, McLaren's 4 points up on Alpine. Who finishes fourth?
Alpine.
I agree. I say Alpine as well. And then if you look at the drivers, the two battles I highlighted, we have Charles at second and Sergio at third. Checo's only 2 points behind. Who takes second place in the drivers?
Checo, because he's got momentum.
I agree. Checo, because he's got a Red Bull.
Well, he's had a Red Bull all year.
Yeah, but he sort of took a little break for a little bit and wasn't as aggressive. He just needed to have another street track to wake him up, a wet street track.
Does that mean
both of us think Checo? What do we think about George and Carlos though for fourth? 1 point apart.
I think Carlos, just because I think the Ferrari's got more chance of being higher up the end. I think George might, if George settles into his third and fourth, 50 type area, I think Carlos gets enough, maybe seconds and thirds to pip George.
Man, I agree. This is terrible. I was hoping we'd have some disagreement on these and could argue. I actually think Carlos will beat George and finish fourth, but I think it's the exact opposite reason of George. George being consistent, with the exception of today in Silverstone. Carlos, I think, has more variability. Like, he's peaks and valleys. And I see him having one more peak where I'm not going to say he wins again, but I see a lot more, I see a couple more podiums. I see a couple more opportunities.
Yeah.
The Ferrari underneath him better than the Mercedes underneath George. So again, cars making the difference for both of my answers on the drivers. But it'll be exciting to watch those couple things finish out the season and some great races left after Japan as well.
Yeah, and what would be really exciting to be able to do at the end of the Japan race next week is to have a DRS guest on. We lucked out this week and didn't get one, but please, come on, guys. There must be people out there who have listened to our 100 seconds of DRS and are kind of on the fence as to whether they should do it. Just do it. We're fine. We're good. We ask stupid questions and you'll have fun. Please.
Exactly. And I forgot to ask some people who had sort of said maybe, and so that's on me for not having one this week. But if you're interested, as always, at F1 Dirty Side on Twitter, it will be fun. And so that's all I had this week. Rob, what did you? Anything you want to close us out with?
All I can hope is that by very, very soon and on the way to Japan, Paul has got out of his humid, soggy pants and is ready in a fresh pair of undercrackers to give us a glowing report of what will have been an amazing race in Japan next week.
Yeah, I just hope he's put new stuff on because I don't want him to get arrested on the way to Japan for having no pants on at all.
He does work for Valtteri, and who likes to get his butt out. So
great point. By the way, a lot of Valtteri memes out there about the rain in Singapore and putting his bright white butt out there. It was great to have cars on track after a 3-week break. I guess technically 2 weekends break, but it was 3 weeks almost between races. It was great to have cars on track, and I'm looking forward to Japan very, very much.
Yeah. Until then, take it easy.